This video was originally recorded back in October, following the announcement that a new Command & Conquer game was in the works for the series' 25th anniversary. For all intents and purposes, this discussion between myself and No Strings Productions is designed to provide feedback on what this new Command & Conquer game needs to be. As such, I've provided several timestamps for any specific features you may find interesting or useful. Since the time of original recording, EA has gone into further detail, confirming that this game is indeed Remaster for Command & Conquer Tiberium Dawn and Red Alert 1, which I'll discuss at the end of this interview. So, hey guys, I'm Keyblade 15, and today I wanted to talk a bit about this potential CNC game coming out for the 25th anniversary since Tiberium Dawn came out. EA recently made an announcement saying they have plans for the 25th anniversary, and they wanted to see some feedback from the fans. What do we want to see from a new Command & Conquer game? So to help me out here, I've invited a friend of mine, No Strings Productions, to share his thoughts on this. So if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Stefan. I go by Stefan.
Hello, Stefan.
Hi. Oh boy, Command & Conquer reboot. This would be amazing. Remaster, sorry.
If handled correctly, but I just want to point this out there. I do not trust you at all, EA, considering the last few years of your business practices, especially with Rivals. But you yourself have admitted that, well, you say in the very post from Mr. Jim Vasella right here, following the reveal of Revivals, we heard you loud and clear. It's a fucking disaster.
Reading between the lines.
So basically, this isn't right by you. With the 25th anniversary, we want to do the fans justice, and so they have a very clear emphasis on returning the franchise to PC. And this Reddit post has been verified by EA. Now, Mr. Vasella, he was formerly a producer at EA, and he worked on Tiberium Wars, Red Alert 3, and Kane's Wrath. Now, these were the games that got me into the series, and I still play these games very lovingly to this day.
I believe he was also, I think he also worked on both Battle for Middle-earth games, which used the same engine as Renegade General's Tib Wars. So he has been with EA since they took over all the Westwood assets.
Yeah, so I'm glad to see he's on board, because he clearly knows what CNC is. I mean, when it comes down to Command & Conquer, I'm more of the EA LA side of things, whereas you're more of the traditional Westwood side of things.
Yeah, I grew up with Command & Conquer. Tiberium Dawn was my first PC game when I was like 5 or 6 or something. And I just grew up with the franchise. So I'm actually one of the Westwood fans who does like the EALA games. They did do a pretty decent job. And you can definitely tell people like Jim Vasella, who worked at EALA on the EA CNC games, they were definitely fans of Command & Conquer. And while there were definitely missteps and things that were not quite right, they weren't exactly the same as it used to be, it always sort of felt like that was more coming from EA rather than EALA. The people working at EALA on CNC3, Red Alert 3, were definitely fans. So when Jim says he's a fan, going back as far as Battle for Middle-earth, it does check out.
Yeah, I've a lot of faith that this man right here, this great man, this wonderful producer at EA, he knows what it's like to be a CNC fan, and I do think he genuinely respects the name and he wants to do right by that. So the way I'm looking at this, they clearly want to make a new game for the 25th anniversary, which is just under 2 years' time. And there's really two ways I really see this going about it. Is they could either make a new game, or they will make a remake. So first of all, I just want to discuss, if they're going to make a new CNC game, what would that need to be? Like, when it comes down to making a sequel, I'm kind of nervous around the Tiberium and Red Alert games. So like with Tiberium, obviously, CNC4 was unanimously hated by critics, players, and even the dev team themselves. Like, Greg Black, he ditched EA after, they made the plan. Like, originally CNC4, it was supposed, little bit of context here, like, CNC4 was supposed to be, like, an Asian market-orientated spin-off of Tiberium Wars for the Asian market, which inspires so much great production value, it's always great, that sort of stuff. And then Big Daddy EA, they were like, well, that's great, but why don't you,
We want to be able to sell this to more people. We want it to be less niche. We want to make it the sequel. Let's put a great big 4 on it.
And stick it in a box. And
if you want to hear more about
Yeah, we have made several videos remarking the wonderful thing it is Command and Conquer 4, where it totally destroyed the foundations on a structural and story-based level, and also all of its gameplay techniques were completely bastardized and ruined. And I'd say they damn near killed the RTS genre. Like, the only RTS game people still talk about is Starcraft II, which Greg Black worked on. And for some reason, he thought Rivals would be the next big thing after Starcraft II, and I'm like, what?
Yeah, I don't know what he was. He was kind of. He always came across as one of the biggest CNC fans in EALA. So whenever it was talked about, like, all the people at EALA who were Westwood fans, his name was always forefront. And at this point, it's like, you don't know what he's saying anymore.
Yeah, it's like, I remember like reading this whole thing about an interview he did. Like, right, he was basically saying, Rivals, CNC mobile game? That sounds like a terrible idea. And then EA pitched it and feel like, this could work. This sounds like a brilliant idea. And
yeah, he ditched Blizzard for that.
Yeah, he ditched Blizzard to make this.
But yeah, if there's going to be a new game, it can't be CNC 5. There's no two ways about it. Yeah, CNC 4 didn't happen. It's not real. Because you can't go anywhere with a story after that, and Kane he is ubiquitous to the Tiberium universe. Him and the Tiberium, those are the two most important things. And you can't just go, well, he's not there anymore because of this crap game that no one liked.
It's like, you made the argument in your own video that if they're going to make a new game, it has to be a core standard entry. None of this Rivals, none of this, Tib Alliances, none of this Red Alert Online, or God help us battle. It has to be a core standard entry, and the only way I see a future being for Tiberium is if they retcon 4.
Yeah, it didn't
because,
happen.
Yeah, it is universally hated, and I feel like if it were to roll back to Kane Traff's ending, you could make sequels and spin-offs, and it wouldn't even have to be a conclusion. I mean, if you're going to remake any CNC game, remake CNC 4, retcon the old one, and make it a proper one.
Yeah.
But aside from that, I do not see a way for Tiberium to move forward. And Red Alert is a very similar thing. I'm not really sure how you can top Red Alert 3 in concept. Like, Red Alert 1 was supposed to be a prequel to Tib Dawn by creating an alternate version of World War II between the Soviet Union and the Allied nations, being the predecessors to GDI and the Brotherhood of Nod.
Yeah.
And then Red Alert 2 was like, well, why don't we make it its own thing? And they were a bit more creative and a bit more unorthodox with things like mind control squids destroying like ships and flying saucers and everything, just going nuts with it. And Red Alert 3 took this concept and just went totally nuts with it. Like, I'm not really sure you can top Tim Curry playing this mad Soviet general going back in time to murder Albert Einstein, to wake up in the modern day to find that the world is being wiped out by these jury-rigged Soviet steampunk war machines against the Allies' fledgling yet unorthodox technology, all the while provoking George Takei's wrath as a traditional mix of Japanese military ninjas and things with anime-inspired death robots conquering the world. But that is an amazing concept.
It was just fun. Like, with Red Alert, you can just go with, this is the setting now. It doesn't matter if you didn't play the previous games. My concern with sequels, though, is that every time you do a sequel, you're constrained by the previous works. And this I think this is mainly a problem with Tiberium, because you have a storyline. With Red Alert, there's less of a storyline. You can, same with Red Alert 2, Red Alert 3, you can just go, this is what we're doing now. Because the first one was an alternate World War II. Red Alert 2 was an alternate Cold War. And Red Alert 3 just sort of did its own thing, which helps with creatively. It was much more creative, much more unique. But at the same time, the Cold War is very, very recognizable. You can understand immediately what's going on. You look at Red Alert 2, you go, Cold War with fancy tech. And you look at Red Alert 3 and go, space! I wonder what his favourite key on the keyboard is.
It is Red Alert Tim Curry.
Yeah.
Game. But yeah, the problem with Red Alert is that, like you say, it's really difficult to follow up with something that was so outlandish and crazy. Like, it doesn't have so much problem with like story-wise. It's simply beating it thematically. Ultimately, Red Alert 3 had a crazy cast. Like, it was like almost all-star. You had J.K. Simons, you had Jonathan Pryce. You had obviously Tim Curry. I think there was like Greg Ellis in there, and just so many others. They feel like to top that, get an equally good cast like that is going to be a tremendous task. And, you've got to handle it right.
You got to find people that can really chew the scenery.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think would lead back to Generals. I think Generals has the most potential because it's only had one official outing. And with Zero Hour being its only expansion, but unlike the others, it doesn't have like a massive storyline or any sequels. It is just simply a standalone universe.
I'm not much of a fan of Generals, to be honest, at all. I don't really get what's going on. Like, a lot of people go, "Oh, we need to bring back Generals," and I'm like, I don't get it. But at the same time, it is Generals. The Generals universe does serve a very important purpose, which is it is very, very relatable. It is very grounded in reality.
Yeah,
because it's been modern wars of the last 20 years. You look at it like. This is something I find really, really important with games, especially with attracting new people. You need to be able to look at the game and understand basically what's going on. People say that story doesn't matter in games, and for the most part that's true. But setting is very, very important. And I think that's why the most popular Command & Conquer games, the ones that people that are not gamers remember. I work with people that don't play games, and a lot of them have played Command & Conquer. And the ones they generally have played the first one, either Red Alert 1 or Red Alert 2, and some have played Generals, because those are the ones you can look at on the surface and understand immediately the setting.
Yeah.
So while I don't really like Generals personally, I can 100% understand why people do, because the setting is excellent for this. It is excellent at drawing people in. And Generals 2 was a good idea for a new studio. So bringing back Generals would be a decent kind of idea, because it's the story doesn't matter as much as the Tiberium universe or the Red Alert universe. You can do whatever you like, and you're not stepping on anyone's toes. But at the same time, it's very relatable. So you can bring in new people to introduce them to Command & Conquer, and then go on to do the bigger ones that need to be done a certain way.
I mean, like with Generals 2, the problem Generals 2 had is that EA, like in its original form, it was looking like a genuinely good sequel that had the Generals theme. It was a very faithful game originally to the original Generals game and Zero Hour, but the problem was that EA, doing what they did best, they tried to bastardize it by turning it into a free-to-play, pay-to-win game. And like, they made a damage control PR statement saying that, we heard you loud and clear, you don't like this game. This game just isn't going to work out. And so we cancelled it. We're going to shut yet another studio working on CNC and, rip people's jobs. We're not just going to destroy the CNC license, we're going to destroy people's livelihoods. That is a wonderful business practice, EA. And you wonder why people hate you. You voted worst company in America 2 years of the road. There's a reason for that, I'm just saying.
I wonder what the trophy looks like.
I think it's literally like a golden poo. I think I've actually seen it.
Nice.
And it's like, yeah, what a wonderful thing to hang in Andy Wilson's office. But yeah, basically my point is, if they were to make it more like the original concept of Generals 2, I can see that working out. Because I did think it looked very promising. It had the base building mechanics, it had all like the traditional harvesting, but it had a lot of the charm that the original game had.
Yeah, it looked decent. I was getting quite excited for it. When I found out that we're planning on just bringing in random units and factions from Tiberium and Red Alert games, I was like, yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. There's no crossover between them. You can have a crossover between Red Alert 1 and Tiberium Dawn because there's a very definite link between the two. That would make sense. But it's like, there's a portal in space and time, and now you've got mammoth tanks. You don't do that.
I mean, I wouldn't totally write off that idea, but I would say that's more of the realm of mods as opposed to an actual game.
Yeah, you could see it in a mod, but when that's becoming, this is what you pay for in this service, it's just wrong.
Yeah, it is. I think that's why people were against it, and it was a shame because it did have a lot of promise, and EA ruined it with the free-to-play mechanic and how they wanted to monetize it. Like, they weren't even gonna have a campaign, for God's sake. Like, what?
Yeah.
Like, when it comes down to CNC, I'm more of a single-player orientated player. I like the campaigns, and I like the skirmish mode. But when it comes to multiplayer, I'm not too fond of it because usually I get trounced about 7 out of 10 times, unless I'm playing Red Alert 3. I think that's the only game I have at least some chance of winning. But it's still a tough fight, and I prefer, just having fun with it. And I think that's something that should be kept in mind if you were going to make a remake or a new game. It does need to have the story, it does need to have the single-player elements, and not just multiplayer.
I brought it up before, but I get quite concerned about the setting, because everything about the game should stem from the gameplay. And that's the way that Tiberium Dawn was organically created. Everything comes from, we're going to make a game that players like this. And they come up with the setting, the factions, the story, all of that around it. And the gameplay was basically, we're going to do a bit more of Dune 2, but we'll set it in a modern world, so it's recognisable, and so we're not using someone else's IP. And then that'll be it. Everything else comes from that. Tiberium, as a gameplay mechanic, the story, all of that comes from the gameplay. And the problem with sequels is you've already got this setting, so you're just building off what's done before, and you kind of lose focus of where it's come from. So at this point, I don't know if I could say reboot exactly, but if they were to do a new game, it wouldn't necessarily need to be, let's do a sequel, let's follow on from here. You've got to go back to the gameplay and work something out from that.
I mean, I think with that example, I think Tiberium Wars is perhaps the best example of that, because Tiberium Wars had such a huge emphasis on lore and world building, and not just from gameplay, but they actually had the whole tertiary objective, like intelligence data. And they had some very interesting stories. Like it told you things from the problem. Like if you breathed in Tiberium, the crystals literally grow inside of you and literally kill you from the inside out. And
that stuff's fascinating.
And because if you had troops inside a Tiberium field, they would they would slowly die from the radiation. And I thought the lore actually goes on to what is actually happening to those guys. It's like, basically the bottom line is like, don't put people in a Tiberium field. And
it also had a bit of a reboot in regards to the gameplay, so it felt a little bit closer thematically to the original CNC than to Tiberium Dawn, which was following on from, which was, I think, a very good move.
Yeah, like you said, like Tiberium Wars is far more faithful, I think, to the original CNC. Like, I always found Tiberium Sun to be a bit odd and a bit out of place, whereas Tiberium Wars tried to take that, but it preferred to use the original foundation. Like, things like Hand of Nod, it reverted back to the old style. With its own futuristic flair, and I thought, that's pretty cool. Whereas in Tiberium it's just like a giant robot hand, and, that's not as... I don't think that's quite as cool. But, that's just me. But basically I'm saying, like, if you make a game that's respectful to the world around it, then you're probably looking at a decent reboot. This goes for, like, a new game or a remake. But I suppose the last thing they could really do with a new game is something, I think, it's a bit of a risk, but maybe try and make a new universe or something, like totally new ideas and like totally new setting. But of course, I wouldn't do that straight off the bat. You need to regain the trust of the fandom before you try something like that, because I've seen it happen before. Things like Battlefield, they made, they made Hardline. It was supposed to be a cops versus robber spin-off game that had, whereas the original series is based on like World War II shooter, futuristic shooter, modern shooter, very grounded in realism, and Hardline just proved to be one of the worst entries in the Battlefield series. Like, we don't want something like that happen to Command & Conquer. Like, you can try and do something, just don't make it like totally out of place. That makes sense.
Don't just go like StarCraft. Oh, we're in space now. It's like, you've got to still be able to look at something and go, that's a tank. If it's a big blob, you're like, well, the bloody hell's that? And that works with a Skrin faction, because that's what the Skrin faction is. But it works because GDI and Nod, you can still look at anything and basically understand what's going on, even though it's in the near future. So I'd be cautiously up for seeing, like, if they were to do a new universe, just because it is possible, and you're not then shackled down with doing justice to what's been done before. But it would still need to be relatable and understandable, because it's always been, the most popular ones have always been modern-ish military, because you can understand what's going on with it. And it needs to be, they need to go, if they do a new universe, it needs to be because it's being dictated by the gameplay. You need to, instead of looking at the recent games and doing, let's do that, but bigger. You have to go back and think about what the actual inspiration behind the original was. Look at the original game, look at what the original was inspired by, which was Dune 2, and then build your gameplay from that, and then build your universe from the gameplay.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that does bring us on to the subject of a remake. Personally, I think if they're going to remake CNC, because obviously it's unspecified how many they're actually going to do, I think the first decade would perhaps be the best thing. I think Tiberium Wars onwards still holds up very well to this day. They don't need to be remade.
Yeah.
Now, I think specifically Generals and Renegade would benefit tremendously from a remake, because obviously they were predominantly in-game rendered to CGI made cutscenes, whereas like the older ones they actually use like live action. Because like when I look at Renegade specifically, like I feel like this game would probably benefit the most, because like you were saying in your own video, you're saying how Dune 2 was the granddaddy of the RTS genre.
Yeah, Big Daddy.
And it was the Wolfenstein of its time, whereas CNC was the Doom of the RTS series.
Yeah.
When it comes down to the shooters, I always think Half-Life was the next step. And obviously there's been a remake in the form of the Black Mesa mod, which has improved visuals, it's improved the gameplay of like shooting mechanics and control schemes. It has made it more lore-friendly to Half-Life 2 by introducing characters that weren't necessarily there. Like in the original, they were just generic scientists, whereas in Half-Life 2, they kind of alluded to the idea of Gordon Freeman actually had friends who survived the event of Black Mesa. They actually fixed that. And I think if they were to do that for Renegade, now they have, you know, people like DICE, who, like, I think like the next step up from shooters for Half-Life was, you know, things like Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, Battlefield. They now have much more experience of how to make a good shooter, that I think if that were to be used for Renegade, that would work incredibly well, because like they didn't really know what they were doing. Because that's the sad thing about CNC. Although they make fantastic RTS games, it never was able to really transition to a different genre.
No, every single time they tried. So, you know, speaking as someone that does really, really like Renegade was a pile of crap, to be honest.
Yeah, gameplay-wise, it wasn't great.
It's not a great game. It's a fun game. I make a very important distinction between quality and engagement. It's an engaging game, but it's not a good game. And while you're right, it would definitely benefit the most from a remaster, I don't think they should do anything with Renegades, because it would not be received well. Oh, you want Command & Conquer PC Renegade Remaster. So while it would definitely benefit greatly from it, I don't know if it would turn it into a good game.
I mean, like, my main driving force behind getting Renegade was Tiberium Wars. Like, when I was a kid, I loved the world of Tiberium Wars. Like, I look at Hannah Blunt and I thought, like, I really want to go inside that building. I really want to see what happens inside there. Renegade empowered you to do this. It was a fantastic piece of fan service, I think, to people wanting to explore the world of Tiberium from a different perspective. That, I think, is what Renegade did.
Yeah.
As the actual shooting mechanics and overall game design, it was pretty crap, I'm afraid.
Fun but bad.
I mean, I suppose with the remaster, we do have Renegade X, which has actually found a way to make Tiberium sound a first-person shooter, which I think is really cool. But to sort of bring it on to like Generals, I suppose, like one of the things they can, like, all the games tried to do up until this point, but weren't quite able to due to the technical restrictions of like computing power at the time. Like Renegade had this brilliant idea of actually creating a cinematic experience through in-game cutscenes. Like I remember one of the first missions in Generals was you see these two F-35 screaming overhead trying to survey this desert as two battalions of Crusader US tanks clash with GLA Scorpions, and they end up in a really intense firefight, and the GLA start to pull back with these F-35s coming back around, bombing the shit out of these tanks and wiping them out. And I feel like, I really want to take part in that fight, and suddenly you can. You are now in command of this tank division. It's up to you to wipe out the rest of the GLA. I feel like that is something they wanted to do with the old games, but they couldn't quite do that. It's like, I think one of the original cutscenes for Tib Dawn was like, there would be like a few attack bikes moving in on the area, and they would just transition to just a few units popping out of the fog of war. And I feel like if they handled it the way Generals did, with modern things, I think that would be a tremendous improvement to the story, making it a bit more immersive and more cinematic in a way. If you were to remake those, that would be brilliant. But when it comes down to the live action thing, that is a much bigger challenge.
You can't really touch it.
Yeah.
So unless, because I did hear that the original recordings of the cutscenes, because they did still keep the original recordings, the ones that were compressed down to fit into the game. They did keep them because the cutscenes from like the PS1 and Saturn versions of the game or something, they were compressed down not from the ones on DOS. They were compressed down from the original footage because they were compressed differently. So Westwood still kept the recordings. I heard that it went missing during the transition from EA closing them, so there's no real way of us knowing if EA still has the original footage. Presumably, like the uncompressed cutscenes were on some computer somewhere. We don't know if said computer still exists.
I mean, I still have some hope for like the live action. I mean, you were quite. I remember you argued with me in private that the live action scene should not be changed.
Yeah.
And I actually found a Generals mod where it actually was supposed to be like a conversion mod of Tib Dawn, and it actually somehow managed to upscale the actual live action scenes. I feel like if they can do that really well, I feel keep them. I wouldn't have a problem with that. The old games, they are brilliant timeless classics, but they have aged with technology and like control schemes being a bit more dated. But I think OpenRA would serve as a tremendously useful template for, at least up until Tiberium Sun, I think. Or maybe even Red Alert 2, I suppose.
It's a modern engine that can run those three games, technically. So OpenRA looks dated, you think?
Well, not visually. I mean, visually, I think it would benefit from overhauling the graphics. But the great thing about OpenRA is that it maintained the nostalgic themes of the original game and art style, but it engaged all like the modern tools of having you can produce more than one troop at a time.
Yes.
You can build like a production structure and a defensive structure at the same time.
This is, I think, what they need to do if they do a remaster. Keep it looking and sounding, if not the same, very similar. So it still feels the same. You still feel like you're playing the same game. But all those quality of life changes that have been made to RTSs over time. That's what the remaster is for. Because if you've played a couple of modern RTSs and then you go back and play Tiberium Dawn, which you can because Tib Dawn, Red Alert 1 and Tibsun are all legally freeware. You can just download those legally and play them if you can get them running, because they are pretty old. And then you realise that I can only queue up one unit at a time, so I'll just be sitting here clicking on rifle inventory once every 5 seconds. And I can only control with left click and not right click, which most people are used to, which is something I need to bring up. If any Command & Conquer game going forward, they need to keep the option between left click and right click to command. The way that the EA LA games did it, having that toggle was perfect. Just keep doing that. But most other RTSs and now MOBAs use right click, which if you come from the classic Westwood games, they don't control like that. So people from those games, that's what they're used to. I cannot get used to controlling with right click. I've tried Starcraft II and I just gave it up because I can't control it.
Where for me, it's the complete other way around. I cannot adapt to the left click very well.
That's why it needs to be an option. Like bloody Starcraft 3 or whatever, they can just have right click on its own if they want to, because I believe it's probably always had that. But Command & Conquer has always been left click, and from Tib Wars, possibly Generals onwards, they made it right click with an option to go back to the classic left click as you remember it. And that is such an important thing that needs to be kept in, especially for a remaster.
I mean, like, when it comes... I mean, I'm glad you mentioned StarCraft, because I have a real gripe with how Blizzard handled StarCraft Remastered, because all they really did is that they gave it a fancy texture pack for StarCraft 1, but they did not address any of the bugs.
I keep hearing people saying that they were really, really happy with StarCraft Remastered, though, so I think this is a mixed opinion situation.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. My problem was that it was just so frustrating just trying to get, like, fixing bugs. Like, my main issue was probably with, like, SCV harvesters. they would constantly fight over this one mineral crystal. They wouldn't think to maybe, oh, I can't get to this one, maybe I'll switch to a different one. They would basically keep fighting over it and get to a point where it's like, you know what, I'm not getting my turn on this mineral crystal, I'm just going to sit here and do nothing. I've had enough. And I'm just like, really? Starcraft II, they did actually transition to a different crystal if they couldn't actually get to that resource. And I feel like if they did something like that with the old Command and Conquer, like, could you imagine like a harvester just deciding not to work because it couldn't harvest a Tiberium crystal?
Here's the thing though, it's based on the original engine though, isn't it? So they intentionally kept in all of those quirks that were in the original game by design. They have to be kept in because otherwise it wouldn't play the same. This allows people that competitive play Starcraft 1 to transition to the new game, which would run better and have more quality of life things like the zoom. But it would play exactly the same, and this is something that I feel very strongly about, that I'm going against what you think, which is if they use the original engine, you have to keep all that stuff in. If you make your own balance, absolutely fine. Like, the game is fundamentally unbalanced. Have your own, have the new balance to make it better to play now. But if it's using the original engine, you have to keep in the original balance. I'm a massive fan of Command and Conquer, and obviously, I'm a massive fan of Super Smash Brothers. And every so often, the discussion is brought up. Oh, what about Melee HD? What if they remake Melee and put on a new console? Or would they just port Melee to a new console with HD graphics? If they were to do like a port of it, even if it's running on the original engine, it would not play the same. And knowing Nintendo, they'd remove wave dashing, they'd remove like multi-shining, they'd remove the Ken combo, they'd remove fun cancelling, and all that kind of stuff. And it would not be the same game. It would have like the same characters, the same stages. It would look a bit better and it would play a little bit better. But because it doesn't play the same, the people that play it competitively will probably not go to that game. They won't play it. They'll stick with the one that they already play. They'll stick with the one they've already plumbed the absolute depths of to figure out how that game works. The way competitively, you take the game apart, you figure out how it works, and then you work with that. Like, for instance, in real world sports, take tennis. There are rules to tennis. You can choose not to follow those rules, but you'll get penalised for it. Like in tennis, you can whack someone over the head with your racket. You can do that, but you'll get penalised for it, because those are rules. In games you don't have rules, you have laws. Like, you can't just do that because the game will not allow it. You can do anything those rules allow you to do, which allows like tool-assisted speedruns, tasks, and that kind of stuff like that. That is possible in those laws of the game, and in the competitive scene, you can get as close to that as you can, as long as you're within those rules. Which is why those quirks have to stay in, because it's expected behaviour. That's how the game works. People rely on that, whether it's good, whether it's bad. And if you change it, it's now not the same game. The competitive scene won't move to it, because it's been different. It's going to get updates, it's going to change. We'll stick with the one that works how it does now, because we've plumbed the absolute depths of that. We know how the laws of that game work, and you know, it wouldn't make a difference to the casual scene either.
I think the reason why I think OpenRA works, I think it's like the middle ground there, because like it maintains the aesthetic and the laws of the original game,
yeah,
but it made the control scheme more intuitive, to the point where it made the game easier to play, but it didn't necessarily change any of the rules of the game.
Yes.
Apart from the balancing changes. I think the only thing you really need to do with that is simply make the control scheme intuitive, which is one of the reasons why I ended up playing this StarCraft II mod called Mass Recall, because it basically converts all of StarCraft 1 single player content and its campaigns onto StarCraft 2 to the point where, you know, it would follow the rules of StarCraft 2, but, you know, maintain the main emphasis on StarCraft 1.
Yeah. If you use a new engine as like a port kind of remaster, you know, you can't really get completely close to it, but people did still get annoyed with OpenRA or changing the balance and the tech trees and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the intuitive control scheme is probably going to be the one thing I can absolutely ask that has to be improved. I think when it comes down to like the live action series. Like, if you can keep the old ones, go for it. But if you're going to remake them, there are a few deal breakers. Like, the one thing that has to absolutely be kept in, and there's no negotiating this, Mr. Joe Coogan must reprise his role as Kane.
Yeah, no CG bald guy with makeup on. It's got to be Joe. And more importantly, you got to bring back Eric Gooch as Seth, the most important.
I mean, if you can get the original cast members, I understand that's a very difficult ask to think, but if you could do that, or at least get the key ones back, that would be great. But there's one character that is absolutely non-negotiable, is Mr. Joe Coogan. Please playing Kane. Because people can play Kane, but he is Kane. Like, there is no one else who can play Kane like Mr. Joe Coogan can.
Joe as Kane is the staple of the Tiberium universe.
Yeah. I mean, I think the only other... I think supporting would be great is if Jared Mendelsohn...
Jared was fantastic.
Potentially Mikhail Sandgren as well. I think they would be very welcome to return to the score. You know, Jared worked so well with Frank Kopecki's music for Tib's Son. I think it would be great if they could get him back on board as well. And Mikhail Sandgren did several music for... He composed the majority of the score for Generals.
I think he's done a small handful of tracks through CNC3, Red Alert 3. I don't know if Jared would work well with Red Alert, because he's got a very electronic style that works really well with the Tiberian universe. And I don't know if you heard any of his stuff for the Ordos House for Emperor Battle for June. But he's got a very techno-electronic style, which fits very well with Tiberium. I don't know if it fits well with the Red Alert universe, which is more industro-funk.
I think it would have worked quite well with the Skrin faction, if I'm being honest.
Oh my god, yeah, that would be perfect for Skrin.
Yeah. So it had these sort of weird, I don't know, Wasteland sort of sounds with these sort of I don't know, kind of the theme of these sort of alien beasts sort of roaming it. That's the sort of feel I got from that.
He does a good Red Zone kind of
it
sound.
was a very Red Zone orientated score. That's what I liked about it.
Yeah.
Which I think, the next thing I kind of want to bring up is obviously, please do not put microtransactions in this game that determine whether you'll win or not. I would rather you don't have any microtransactions at all, because I am quite happy to play Red Alert 3 and all the other games without microtransactions. I have plenty of fun without having to spend any extra apart from these excellent expansion packs they made for those games.
I do have a quote here from Jim. Quote, "We will not be adding any microtransactions to a CNC remaster."
Well, that's a good thing. Thank you.
No mention of any sequels or anything that's not a remaster. I think it's very specific. CNC remaster.
To be able to customize your Ava voice would be great, because there are a few iconic ones I quite liked from over the years. I really liked Cabal's voice for... Basically, I like every Ava the Brotherhood had from CNC2 onwards. Cabal, the one they did for 3 and 4, were excellent. GDI had an excellent Ava voice for Tiberium Wars. If you could make us give us the opportunity to choose which one we wanted, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. Especially for me, the first two for Tib Dawn and Red Alert 1 are some of the most iconic. Even just using the originals, the original voices, they hold up. Here's an idea. Right, so the game is let's say Red Alert is remastered, and it includes Counter-Strike and the Aftermath, and it's got all the units in that, and it's a decent remaster. It's basically the original game, but you can zoom in a bit. It's basically OpenRA but done AAA. How about a couple months or half a year down the line, they come out with an expansion pack for Red Alert Remastered. The original expansion packs, like Counter-Strike, the Aftermath, Cobra Tops, they add essentially another campaign. This is where they could come in with doing new cutscenes. They could do a new story here rather than doing a full sequel. You can carry on from a war that's already been done. They can do their own story set during Red Alert 2 or Tiberian Sun in an expansion.
So kind of more like an anthology sort of thing.
I suppose so, yeah. The standard old expansions, but you could big it up as much as you like.
I mean, they did kind of do this with Starcraft II, because they launched the game with the Terran campaign Wings of Liberty, and then about a year later they released the Heart of the Swarm expansion, which gave the Zerg faction a story which continued on from where the Wings of Liberty campaign left off.
Right.
And then they made the Legacy of the Void DLC for the Protoss, which continued on from where Heart of the Swarm leaves off. And it basically continues the story as you're going on with new gameplay features and everything. And I think that's why Starcraft II is still talked about, because, you know, when I finished Wings of Liberty, I feel like I need to know what happens next. And I really enjoyed it, because I got Wings of Liberty for free, with the, you know, Starcraft II being free now.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what, I really want to find out what happens next, because, you know, it had a very good ending. And I thought, I want to see what happens with these characters next. And that's why I was more than happy to drop my 30 quid to get the rest of the campaigns. And I enjoyed them. So I think if they were to do that by creating quality campaigns with fantastic story, brilliant, you know, gameplay additional features, and we've got a good game.
Yeah, just like you've got, if you have a remaster of Red Alert 2,
yeah,
and it includes a remaster of Yuri's Revenge, it uses the original cutscenes, because from Tipson onwards, the cutscenes, they look fine, they upscale fine.
Yeah.
And then they do a little way down the line an expansion, Yuri's Revenge 2. For the people, if you got the remaster of Red Alert 2, you can get this expansion as like a big DLC pack. Like, you could buy it, what, 20 quid? That would be worth at least 20 quid. It's essentially a full extra game, and that allows you to make a new story, essentially a new Red Alert game, that doesn't necessarily need to follow on from the next game, from Red Alert 3. Like, you could have a whole slew of campaigns set after Yuri's Revenge and before Red Alert 3. You can have a whole slew of, like, Firestorm 2. That would work really well, like Firestorm 2 to bridge the gap between that and how it came to be in Tiberium Wars. All those small references to the previous things are, you know, rewards for the players for understanding what's going on.
That, I think, would be an excellent celebration of the old games,
Yeah.
because you'd have the old original experience, and then you'd be able to build on that.
Yeah.
And it would mean that if people really like Red Alert 2, they would have reasons to play that game, not just for that nostalgic effect. They would have new things to look forward to.
Yeah.
And I think that would work quite well with, like I said, like the first decade, I suppose. But then again, you could do the same with like Tiberium Wars and Red Alert 3. Like, one of the best mods I've seen for Tiberium Wars was the Forgotten mod, which tried to tie the gaps between the Forgotten story from Tibsan, brought into Tiberium Wars, and ultimately gave that faction more of the limelight.
Yeah.
And it you know, it was a story that could be told within the game that furthered that experience.
Yeah.
That would be brilliant.
Because at the end of the day, these remasters, they are going to be for the fans.
Yeah.
The old games aren't really that they aren't really that easy to set up on modern machines. Even though the first 3 games are freeware, it's not easy to set up, and the way that they control, it's not easy to get your head around if you've not played it before. It's not friendly to newcomers, essentially. So these remasters, they would, you know, screw Command and Conquer for a new generation. Show the new generation the Command and Conquer. You're bringing back these games, not just for the fans, it's so that new people can finally play these old games that aren't easy to set up and enjoy. And this is where you could, like, expansions to these games would be fantastic.
Yeah, that would be brilliant, honestly, because like with like sort of going back to Age of Empires 2, like although the HD edition uses the traditional visuals and format, they still make new content based on that, and it furthers that gameplay experience. I think, you know, have traditional like Red Alert 2 sort of like look and feel, but with like, you know, better controls and things, and, you know, build on that, and we're looking at a game that is already fantastic and improving it.
Right, so
that's a pretty exciting idea, honestly. I really like that.
Shall we wrap up by saying which game do you think best should be remastered and why?
Yeah, I think, just to sum up some points, you know, definitely cover the first decade. I feel Tiberium Wars onwards, they're fine as they are. You know, you don't really need to change them. Maybe an update, you know, to fix any lingering bugs or anything. Maybe bring back multiplayer for those games through official channels.
Would be nice, but not the most necessary.
No, not the most necessary. But honestly, you know, the older games would benefit the most from a more intuitive command set, and building upon those foundations. And whilst not completely destroying, you know, as long as that the original themes and the gameplay are left intact with some new exciting additions for like future content, that would be fantastic. I'd more than happily welcome that.
Yeah, so I think if they were to do a remaster, I think they should start from the beginning, and if they want to do more remasters, work from there. So definitely, if they were to do a remaster, I'd say Tib Dawn and Red Alert are the prime candidates for a remaster first. If they want to do more, 100% go for it. You know, I'd buy any remaster they do as long as it's competently done. But if they were to start with it, like I say, you know, this is a chance to introduce new people to it, and those two games are, I think, the best introduction to it. But apart from that, I would say Red Alert 2 is probably one of the best ones to remaster as well, because firstly, it's one of the most recognisable. I think it's the game that had the most broad appeal. I think Generals had one of the best sales as well, but Red Alert 2 had the most broad appeal, I think, all the games. And on top of that, Tib Dawn, Red Alert 1 and Tib Sun are all freeware. Red Alert 2 is the only one, really, that is one of the only Westwood game that is not available online. You can only get it through the Ultimate Collection. You can't get it standalone, and there's no guarantee that it'll work. For its massive broad appeal and for being the most difficult of the Westwood's CNCs to set up, I would love to see that.
That would be brilliant. Like, it's often considered to be the magnum opus of the CNC universe, and it let Westwood go out with a bang.
Oh yeah, I'd agree.
Red Alert 2 was just a brilliant way to finish off the CNC franchise under their leadership, and it would be great to see that game brought back in a much easier way. Like, it's such a pain to get Red Alert 2 now. Like, it's so hard to find a disc that works, and obviously with fan patches and everything, it is incredibly difficult to get hold of this game. Yeah, it is considered the best one. It's like, out of all the Westwood games, it is probably my favourite. I definitely consider it within like the top 3 favourite games of mine within the CNC franchise.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If I'm honest, I would be perfectly happy with them forgoing any new games whatsoever if they were to go back and remaster each of the old ones in order. And they could then do expansions for each of those. That would be essentially the new game without having to create a new setting or new characters, really. Just like, do a remaster of the old ones through the first decade, and here's an expansion pack, or if that one does really well, here's another expansion pack. We'd buy those. That's what the fans would buy.
Yeah, I'd absolutely would. And like, if you are going to do a remaster, just one final thing, I suppose, like, don't pull a Call of Duty Modern Warfare remastered.
Oh god. Yeah.
It has to be like a definitive edition where all the DLC is on the disc. I think Modern Warfare was just a complete nightmare with that, because like the game itself, well, it was tied to Infinite Warfare, was awful.
Yeah.
They then had the audacity to resell the DLC separately for a remaster. I think £5 dearer than the original.
Oh Christ.
I'm like, oh my god, what are you doing? Just put it on the disc. If you can't put it immediately in there, put it in as a free update or something. But yeah, just...
And by that point, no one's playing it anymore, no. So it's just campaign.
Yeah, it is purely campaign. So please just put all the DLC on one disc. Do not resell it separately as separate DLCs. Only do it for additional chapters on top of that.
Yeah, don't do bad things, only do good things.
Don't pull arrivals on us, please.
Oh god.
But yeah, I think that about covers it. Special thanks to Stefan for joining me.
Special thanks for me to being me. Thank you so much for having me.
I've been Keyblade 15.
I've been Stefan.
And I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Addendum. It appears I've shared in Stefans Curse. I was halfway through editing this video when all of a sudden EA made a rather unexpected statement recently regarding the future of the CNC franchise. I am of course referring to the announcement that Command & Conquer Tiberium Dawn as well as Red Alert 1 are being remastered from the ground up for PC, along with their respective expansions. Honestly, while this isn't exactly the first decade being remastered, I can at least appreciate that starting with these two games is a fair and realistic start. I think we can all agree that out of all the Command & Conquer games, these two could really benefit from an overhaul. But the good news doesn't stop there. EA actually made a good decision. The first one I think they've made in years. EA have actually made the sensible decision to outsource the production of the Command & Conquer remasters to Petroglyph Games. For those of you who don't know, following the closure of Westwood Studios, the legends who created the series, Some of the former developers were reassigned to EA's new studio, EA Los Angeles, and these guys honestly made some pretty good CNC games. However, for the vast majority of Westwood, they decided to found their own company known as Petroglyph, where they go on to making several of their own games. The most notable of which being their Star Wars RTS title, Star Wars Empire at War, and its fantastic expansion, Forces of Corruption. Both of which I still play very faithfully to this day, and is a game I'd wholeheartedly endorse for any Star Wars fans out there. Needless to say, to have the original developers at the helm of the very games that shook the gaming industry back in the late 90s is certainly encouraging. After all, even after EA subjugated the company, they still went on to producing a number of highly acclaimed CNC sequels, with their magnum opus arguably being Red Alert 2. In addition, Frank Kopacki, the original composer for most of the series, has been confirmed to be returning to rescore the games. All in all, this is fantastic news, and it gives me a lot more confidence in this project. Maybe, just maybe, we could be seeing a resurgence of the CNC franchise. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves here. This is still EA we're talking about. Despite this announcement, I am still very much opposed to EA, and I don't exactly trust their intentions. If I'm going to be perfectly honest, the CNC franchise is perhaps the only series that still has a hook in me. Your chances for your other Titan franchises, such as Battlefield, Sims, Mass Effect, have sadly been spent. They're a shadow of their former selves to the point where I can't even bring myself to support them anymore. While I'm still very anxious about EA's plans for the CNC franchise, I do at least believe this is a strong start. Let's just hope they can deliver. Anyway, that's a wrap for this video. If you stuck around for this long, thank you so much. Special thanks to Stefan as well for helping make this video possible. Please let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on the CNC remasters, and if you'd like to see more videos like this. I've been Keyblade 15, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching.